Well, look at what I found.
Nuclear fallout and didn't know it. The official history says Moscow burned because Napoleon's forces set fires during their retreat. Scorched earth tactics. Except the timeline doesn't work. The Great Fire of Moscow began on September 14, 1812. Napoleon entered the city on September 14, 1812. His forces didn't have time to set systematic fires. They arrived, and the city was already burning, already destroyed, already dead. And here's what breaks the official narrative completely. Napoleon's army was devastated before winter even started. The infamous Russian winter that supposedly destroyed his forces. That came in November. But by October, most of his army was already gone. Not defeated in battle, not frozen, just gone. 600,000 men reduced to scattered remnants in 6 weeks. No conventional war explains that casualty rate, unless they walked into something worse than war, unless they marched into the incineration zone of a civilization being systematically destroyed. I found a French military report, buried in archives, describing what Napoleon's scouts found as they advanced into Russia. Empty cities, perfectly intact but abandoned. Buildings undamaged. Food still on tables. Possessions left behind, as if entire populations had simply vanished. The report called it the Great Silence. Mile after mile of civilization with no one living in it. That's not war. That's evacuation. Mass evacuation before something catastrophic. And then the fires came. City after city. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kazan, Smolensk. Simultaneously or in rapid succession. Each fire described with the same impossible characteristics. Too hot, too fast, too complete. Stone melting. Metal flowing like water. Destruction so absolute that in some cities nothing remained but glass and ash. Glass. Let me explain something about glass. Normal fires don't create glass. To turn sand and stone into glass requires temperatures above 1,400 degrees Celsius, sustained temperatures. Even modern building fires rarely exceed 800 degrees. But across Russia in 1812, they found glass. Pools of it. Layers of it. Buildings fused into glossy black residue. That's nuclear heat. That's thermal. Devastation beyond anything conventional fire can produce. Accounts, letters, diaries, newspaper reports from 1812. And the descriptions are terrifying. Not because of what people saw, because of what they describe without understanding it. A woman in Moscow wrote, "The light came first, brighter than 1,000 suns. We covered our eyes, but the light burned through our hands. Then came the wind, then came the fire. Brighter than 1,000 suns." That phrase, that exact phrase. It appears in multiple accounts from 1812. A phrase that wouldn't be used again until Oppenheimer quoted the Bhagavad Gita after Trinity test in 1945. Now I am become. A man in Moscow described a great flash in the sky that turned night into day. The flash came before the sound. The sound came before the fire. And when the fire came, it came all at once, not spreading, appearing, as if the air itself was burning. Flash before sound. Thermal radiation traveling at light speed arriving before the shockwave. That's nuclear detonation, not conventional fire. And he described it in 1812. Another account from outside Moscow. A soldier wrote, "The trees were burnt but still standing, the leaves gone, the branches intact but black, and all, the trees pointed away from the city center, as if pushed by enormous wind. But there was no wind, just sudden death." That's blast pattern. Radial devastation from a central point. Trees stripped and directionally damaged. Classic nuclear detonation signature. Documented in 1812. I found a medical report from a Russian doctor treating survivors. He described symptoms that make your blood run cold. Patients exhibited strange wounds, burns without flame exposure, skin falling away in sheets, hair falling out in clumps, vomiting blood, death within days even without visible injury. Others survived the fire but died weeks later from mysterious sickness. That's acute radiation syndrome, described perfectly, in 1812, by a doctor who had no concept of radiation. He was documenting the symptoms of nuclear fallout and didn't know it. The official history says Moscow burned because Napoleon's forces set fires during their retreat. Scorched earth tactics. There's a painting that hangs in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg that no art historian can fully explain. It's called The Great Fire, and it depicts Moscow in 1812, burning. Except when you look closely, really look, something is wrong. The fire doesn't burn like a normal fire. The buildings don't collapse the way buildings should collapse. And in the background, barely visible, there's a light that's too bright, too intense, too white, a light that looks nothing like flame. I stared at that painting for 3 hours. The museum guards thought I was insane, but I couldn't leave, because I'd seen that light before, in photographs from Hiroshima, in footage from nuclear tests, in documentary images of thermal devastation. That painting, created in 1812, shows the exact visual signature of a nuclear blast, and no one talks about it. The year 1812 is taught as the year Napoleon invaded Russia, a conventional war, muskets and cavalry, artillery and tactics. We're told Napoleon's army was defeated by winter and Russian resistance. 600,000 soldiers marched into Russia. Only 10,000 returned. The greatest military disaster in history, except when you examine the evidence, when you look at what actually happened. Nothing about 1812 makes sense as a conventional war, because 1812 wasn't a war, it was an extermination. The systematic incineration of the Tartarian Empire, and they've been lying about it for 200 years. Let me show you something they don't teach in history class. In 1812, fires destroyed almost every major city across the northern hemisphere. Not small fires, not accidental fires, simultaneous catastrophic fires that consumed entire metropolitan areas in hours. Moscow burned for 6 days. The fire was so intense it created its own weather system. Eyewitnesses described a firestorm that generated winds strong enough to lift grown men off their feet. Temperatures so extreme that stone buildings melted. Stone doesn't melt in normal fires. New York burned in 1812. The entire southern district consumed in a single night. Official cause, unknown origin. Philadelphia had a massive fire. Baltimore burned. Washington, D.C. burned so completely, they had to rebuild the White House. Boston had multiple fires. Charleston, New Orleans, all in 1812. All catastrophic, all officially listed as unfortunate accidents or consequences of the War of 1812. But here's what they don't tell you. Russia and America weren't at war with each other. Napoleon's campaign and the American War of 1812 happened simultaneously, but on opposite sides of the planet.
Yeah, and this is to Katie Holmes. Thank you for receiving this is the office of the Arizona governor, and you know I will address her as ma'am, and I think I have to practice up on all that stuff. It's been a long time since I've been to the UN and all that kind of stuff in New York, and but a lot of people know who we are. But it's just these individuals here who have no idea who we are. They ride around. There's some bad guys, and some of them are bad, and I'm not here to talk about that. It's not my place. I'm not internal affairs, and regardless of, you know, wanting to respect individuals. Some people play a part, and they think it's a fucking game because they're not too bright, you know. But yeah, so that's it. So I sent it off today, 1:15 p.m. I'll let y'all know how it goes.